Khair. We have brother there.
Assalamu alaikum. Just a question around, a lot of people don't actually bother to find out or believe in a God, or just don't take that step to even think about it. And often what you get as a response is, well, as long as I'm a good person in the world and, basically I'm a good person, then I'm fine, and I respect everyone. How do you deal with that argument?
Yes, well, we should acknowledge whatever is good. I mean, we shouldn't try to, first of all, negate everything that people are saying. Sometimes we think this is the way of Dawah. Like, we have an idea, person has a different idea, two ideas are diametrically opposed, and we feel the only way of presenting our idea is first to knock down his idea. No, we can build upon his idea. And so we can start by acknowledging that what he said is good. You're a good person, and you try to be good, and yeah, that's good. We appreciate that. That's the starting point. We believe that God created people with this innate sense to know what is good and to choose what is good, and you have chosen that. To me, you're half Muslim already. And the other part is to recognize that there is a God who actually gave you this sense, and that's what we invite you to believe. Now, if you think about this idea of being good, that means the person has an idea that there's something's right and something's wrong. Something's good and something's bad. Now, some of us know that, okay, there are commands in the Quran, there are teachings. Based on these teachings, you know to choose the good and choose the bad, right? But suppose we were not looking at the Quran at the moment. We were not looking at the life example of the Prophet ﷺ. You know nothing about Quran and Sunnah. Are there some things that are good and some things that are bad? Yes. There is an inner sense in us that says some things are good and some things are bad. We might differ with each other about what exactly are the good things and what are the bad things, at least in some things. But in some things we'll be very clear, we can agree on. Now, let's say we get two big barrels here, one barrel here, one barrel here. So this barrel we label good. This barrel we label bad. And we say, okay, let's take the things one after another. Examine this. Is it a good thing? Yeah, good. Okay, put it in the good barrel. Take the next thing. Is this a bad thing? Yeah, okay, we agree. Put it in the bad barrel. Take this third thing. Good or bad? We don't agree. Okay, leave that one aside because we didn't agree on it, right? So we take more things. If we agree it's good, we put it in a good barrel. We agree it's bad, we put it in the bad barrel. We can't agree, leave it aside for the moment. We don't want to be contentious, right? So in the end now, we have a barrel full of good and we have a barrel full of bad. True? Can we go change the label? Say, okay, let's change our minds now. We were calling that good, right? Make that bad and make this one good. We can't, right? I mean, logically we can't, because our minds are telling us very clearly that some things are, these are the good things and these are the bad things. Now, on the belief that God created us, we can trust our judgment, because when we think that something is good, we think that we know it's good because a good God created us and gave us that intelligence to know the difference between good and bad. Not because he told us this is good and he told us that is bad, but because he gave us an inner sense that helps us to know that this is good and this is bad. And because God gave us that sense and it is dependable, we can't go against that sense now and change the good to bad. On the view that God does not exist, and this is what you have to appreciate, on the view that God does not exist, then one has to explain, how did we come into the universe? Okay, by some blind process of evolution. So maybe our ancestors were apes and then we descended from them and so on. Okay, and so here we are as human beings and we have some ideas. So where do these ideas come from? Through that blind process of evolution over time. Are these ideas then dependable? How do you know that what you think is good is actually good? Because on that idea that we evolved, all of your thinking actually is a product of that evolution, and your thinking is geared towards ensuring your survival. So that what you're thinking is good is not necessarily good, but only good for survival. You have the ideas which are going to help you to survive. But the ideas you have are not necessarily good or bad. Only good for survival. There are some good ideas, good for survival, and there are some bad ideas, bad for survival. But not good and bad in themselves. And I hope you can see the distinction. I hope you can see the distinction between the two things. You know, if somebody says, I'm not doing that because it's bad for business. Or I'm doing this because it's good for business. There's a difference between good for business and really good. Because something which is good may be bad for business. And something which is bad may be good for business. And the businessmen know this because they're doing a lot of bad things that are good for their business. At least good for this short term, right? So when we were putting things in this barrel, we weren't asking good for business, bad for business, good for survival, bad for survival. We were asking, is the thing really simply good? Put it there. Is the thing really simply bad? Put it there. So we are trusting our judgment that some things are good and some things are bad. We can only trust that judgment on the assumption that God created us. The alternative is that we came through a blind process of evolution, and on that assumption, you cannot trust your judgment at all. Because your judgment is coming not from an intelligence source, but from a blind source. I'll explain this in a different way, because it's a very important point, and yet it's a subtle point that sometimes people don't get immediately. You know, there's a famous scientist in this country, Richard Dawkins, who wrote a book entitled The God Delusion. You know that, right? And he's appeared on television and so on. He's promoting atheism. Here is a scientist speaking about philosophy as though he is an expert in both subjects, though he's an expert in science, but not in philosophy. And in his book, The God Delusion, he explains where does morality come from. And he says that people have ideas that, for example, let's say a man sees a woman, he becomes attracted, and he wants to marry her and have children. So what's happening here? He thinks he's making his own free choice to marry this woman and have children, right? That's what he wants to do. But in fact, he's being controlled by his genes. His genes want to multiply, because this is how evolution is driven. The genes multiply. A copy of your genes will be in your children. The successful gene will have many copies. How does the gene become successful? By reproducing and having many copies, duplicating itself. The way for the gene to duplicate itself is for the gene to convince you to get married and have children, so more of those genes will proliferate. So all your actions, though you think you're doing them on your own and for your own good reasons and for your own good pleasure, you are actually controlled by the genes which are propelling you to do these things. And it's not only to marry and have children. Let's say you decide to adopt a child. You are trying to do something good, right? You feel I'm a good person, I'm trying to adopt that child. So now, according to Richard Dawkins in this book, you are not helping your own genes. You are helping somebody else's genes to survive, because you adopt that child, you give that child food to eat, that child will grow up, that child will have more children, and his genes will proliferate. But his genes are not your genes. Now you're helping somebody else's genes to proliferate. So how could that be? He says, well, sometimes the creatures make mistakes. Sometimes the genes that control them, which were supposed to control them to make them reproduce more of their own genes, sometimes their genes trick them into recognizing some other creature and to do good to those creatures and help those creatures to proliferate. That's a mistake in the genes. He gave an example of a certain bird that if you bring a foreign chick and place it into the bird's nest, the bird will then treat that chick as though it's one of its own, like a cuckoo bird, for example. And so the cuckoo bird will treat the foreign chick as its own and keep feeding it and so on. So when a human being, according to Richard Dawkins, when a human being adopts another person's child and fosters this child and so on, this human being is doing what the cuckoo bird does, right? So we're all cuckoo if we adopt. and seriously, this is how he explains human behavior. But now, the fact that he's explaining it like this emphasizes the point I was making in a different way. That if you do not subscribe to the belief that God exists and God created us with an intelligence which we can trust and a sense of good and bad which we can find dependable, the alternative is to believe that we are a process of blind evolution and everything we think is actually a result of that blind process. And whereas we think we have an independent choice and we are making good judgments, the judgments we are making are only products of the system itself, which is designed to proliferate the system. And it's not about us at all. You think you're marrying to have children because you want to have children? Well, it's your genes making you think that you want to have children so that you can proliferate the genes which are in you and which you don't even see. It's not the genes that you're wearing, the genes which are in you. I hope the point is very clear that there are two alternatives basically. Either we believe in God, in which case our intelligence is trustworthy and dependable. What we think is good is really good. What we think is bad is really bad and we can't change it. Or you think that you are the product of blind evolution, in which case there's no reason to trust your intelligence. In fact, in that case, there's no reason even for you to trust the belief that you're a product of blind evolution. As J.B.S. Haldane said, if my brain is made up of atoms swirling, and that's everything that describes me, why should I even believe that my brain is made up of atoms swirling?